matter cannot be created nor destroyed, which means that it's always existed. And but when it comes down to this earth's continuance or its temporal existence, I believe that the Scriptures are literal and they're real. Verse 7, question, what are we to understand by the 7 seals with which it was sealed? Answer, we are to understand that the first seal contains the things of the first 1,000 years, and the second also of the second 1,000 years, and so on until the 7th. So Earth's temporal existence, according to Scriptures, is 7,000 years. And the pedigree dating of DNA would actually support such a statement. However, the phylogenetic rate, which is based on the long age of the Earth and evolution, also describes an Earth that is certainly much older. Now, what happens then when you have data that doesn't support the theory? This data was not supporting the theories of evolution and the age of the Earth, geological age of the Earth. And so this was actually what happened. This is Scientific American, August 1999. It said, the mystery of human origins is far from solved, but because DNA may not be as diagnostic as it once seemed, we're back to the bones. See what's happening there? DNA was showing a very young age for mankind, for humankind, and through the pedigree dating, but that doesn't match up with the theory and what we think that we know from geology about fossils and the time it takes to fossilize wood and bone. It's really good that there are things coming from the fossil side. The DNA studies can just take a back seat. DNA has been used in courts of law to determine life or death sentences. As far as I am aware, I have never heard of anyone being convicted to a death sentence based on geological evidence. Okay? But yet it is done by DNA. When it comes down to the DNA, either the markers are there or they're not there. It's not as much a theoretical basis as is geology. We have never seen how bones are actually fossilized. How did this whole DNA situation get started? Well, it actually began with what was called the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, which was Public Law 101-601 and enacted in November the 16th of 1990. This act required all of academia to return the remains of Native American people back to their appropriate tribes. And this sounds like a really good idea, except for one little thing. Several times there were a set of remains that were being claimed by multiple tribes. And they said, well, we have this new technology. We can sequence DNA. We will sequence the DNA of the remains, and we will then sequence the DNA of the people and the different tribes, and we'll match up the remains with the proper tribe. And that launched a huge, huge project that lasted many years. In fact, is still ongoing to a certain extent. It involved dozens of universities and laboratories and geneticists and thousands of Native American people who had their DNA sequenced. So they began doing the sequencing of Native American people all the way from the Aleuts up in Alaska down through North, Central, and South America. And remember, this is mitochondrial DNA that we're talking about here, which is passed from mothers to daughters to daughters. This is what really began this whole DNA controversy. Now, we need to also understand another thing that's important, and that is that the peopling of the world is supposed to have occurred, as you can see here. This is the modern human origins pseudo-theory. Now, I call it a pseudo-theory because it is a theory which is taught as a fact, when in fact it has some serious questions about it. It is assumed that everything began 200,000 years ago in Africa and then moved up through Central and East Asia and then down across the Bering Strait during an ice age, and then down into North America and then finally into Central and South America. And that was how the peopling of the Americas was supposed to have occurred. When they did the sequencing of the native peoples, they found that they could categorize their DNA lineages into one of 4 primary groups called haplogroups. These haplogroups are called haplogroups A, B, C, and D. All four of these principal groups, which they call the founding groups of the native peoples of the Americas, fell into lineages that all stem back from Asian lineages. In other words, this supports the idea that the native peoples of the Americas actually did come across a land bridge or during an ice age across into North and Central and South America. And so you can see here in American Journal of Physical Anthropology, it says, while widespread, the geographic distribution of four haplogroups is markedly non-random. For example, haplogroup A is extremely common among the Eskimos, or the Aleut tribes. Haplogroup B is extremely common in the American Southwest. Haplogroup D, while present throughout the New World, is the least common of the four haplogroups everywhere, except in certain Western tribal groups. So we have these kind of compartmentalized areas where these different things happen, but they're pretty much found throughout North and South America, which then is where the question begins. Because where did the Book of Mormon claim that Lehi and his group came from? It didn't say that they came from Asia, they came from Jerusalem. And when they came from Jerusalem, then they came over to the Americas, and then they became a mighty people. At the end of the Book of Mormon, it describes the Nephites as being about 230,000 men, plus the women and the children, which would have at least doubled that number, and they were the small group. So there was a very big group of people who were associated with Lehi's family when they first came across. But what do we know, if anything, about the founding lineages of the Book of Mormon? Do we know really anything about the genetic background of the lineages of Lehi or Sariah or Ishmael or his wife? What do we know? Well, we don't have, obviously, a DNA sample from Lehi or Sariah or Ishmael or Ishmael's wife, but what do we know about their lineages? In Alma, chapter 10, verse 30, we find this out about Lehi and his lineage. And Aminadai was a descendant of Nephi, and was the son of Lehi, who came out of the land of Jerusalem, who was a descendant of Manasseh, who was the son of Joseph, who was sold into Egypt by the hands of his brethren. And actually, when Lehi first got the brass plates, he was looking at his lineage, and he realized and discovered that he was of the house of Manasseh through the lineage of Joseph. Okay, so we do know this much about Lehi and his lineage. There are three primary supergroups on the earth. They are basically, in genetic terms, the Europeans, African, and Asian lineages. And the Native Americans were found to be all of the Asian group. But if the Book of Mormon is true, then we should have some evidence for a group that is a European-type group that came into the Americas and populated this area. And what do we know a little bit more about where these three lineages came from? And the Pearl of Great Price here in Abraham, chapter 1, verses 21 and 22, it gives us some indications of where all these lineages go back to, because they all go back to Noah and his three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Now, this king of Egypt was a descendant from the loins of Ham, and was a partaker of the blood of the Canaanites by birth. From this descent sprang all the Egyptians, and thus the blood of the Canaanites was preserved in the land. Who were the Canaanites? They were those who descended from Cain. And so this would be where the African lineages, their DNA, made it through the flood, Noah's flood. And so that's according to the scriptures that Ham would be the one that all the African lineages would go back to Ham. Now, this is from the complete works of Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews, the Wars of the Jews, etc., page 22 and 27. Japheth was another one of the sons of Noah, and he had 7 sons. They inhabited so that beginning at the mountains, Taurus and Amanus, they proceeded along Asia, as far as the river Tanais, and along Europe to Cadiz. According to the Bible, he was blessed by Noah that his descendants would become very numerous, that they had very numerous descendants. And of course, we see in the Asiatic populations exactly that. Shem was the third son of Noah, and he had 5 sons.